So I'll give an update for Northwest Ohio vegetable production. So a lot of the farms that I visit, sweet corn season is pretty much over. I've taken down a lot of my traps, pretty much all of them, except for European corn borer and peppers. A few growers still want those up. But yeah, a lot of late season harvests of peppers and tomatoes still coming in. Seeing some septorial leaf spot, late blight, a little bit of bacterial speck on tomatoes. Seeing increased numbers of brown marmorated stink bug and peppers. I'm sure some of you will talk about that issue as well. But yes, lots of harvests of different brassicas still coming in: cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, onion harvests. But obviously, every time we meet, things are slowing down more and more. So pumpkin season seems to be at full force right now. So I don't have too much of an update because I've been kind of busy with other programs the past 2 weeks. But I just wanted to share a few photos from regarding a recent event we had, a program in Southeast Michigan. So a few Ohio folks were at the program, but it was a field night focused on conservation tillage, cover crops, and field drainage. And we had a strip till demonstration there. And I just kind of wanted to highlight this technology because it is used, it's quite commonly used in vegetable production, more out west. It's used in leafy greens. And I mean, carrots, squash, sweet corn, potatoes apparently are all grown in strip till systems. So basically the idea is you're creating these finely tilled strips where you plant the crop, but you leave the between strip zone, you leave that no-till. So you get all the benefits of no-till, as well as the benefits from some tillage in the areas where you plant the crop. So it's basically, this was a particular unit that was used at the field night. I mean, lots of different companies make strip till units, but it uses coulters, row cleaners. You can't see it here, but there's a shank, and rolling baskets to create a strip for planting. That's kind of what it looks like. Obviously, soil type can impact the performance here, but there's also companies that make strip fresheners, which are kind of a less aggressive approach. And you can integrate, fertilizer application through that, or fumigants. Okay, so strip freshener is just kind of to lightly till the strips that you've already established, because ideally you'd be planting into the same strips year after year. So anyway, I mean, there's been some recent research at MSU that's found a slight yield increase from strip tillage in cucurbits, sweet corn, and beans, green beans. Obviously, there's some caveats, like depending on the weather. In colder weather years, you can get delayed crop development from strip till, and there can be some issues with new weed problems. But I'm going to write just a blurb about it in this week's report because I think it is an underutilized system in vegetable production. Many growers might not even have considered it, and I'll link to some resources in the report this week. So yeah, not too much of an update, but just wanted to sort of highlight that equipment. All right, so I think let's move on to some educator updates. So Carrie, do you have an update for us from Morrow County?
No, I don't really have one. I haven't been to the produce auction in a while. I know everyone's got pumpkins for sale. It seems like those grew pretty well this year. So that's about all I got.
Okay, thanks for being here. Mark, do you have an update from Hardin County?
Yeah, last Friday I stopped by the produce auction. I usually try to do it every week or two, and delivered some downy mildew materials since we had some downy mildew issues with cucurbits this summer, and asked about how much the downy mildew affected the pumpkin crop, because they said it was starting in the pumpkins. And overall, they said, I was told by the manager of the produce auction that there were a couple new growers that lost some pumpkins, but the experienced growers knew what to do and how to manage it with fungicides. And I, of course, gave that list of fungicides that you provided me to them, and the other information that I will provide to them today. But one thing that was mentioned, they do talk. The different produce auction managers do talk. And in some areas of the state, the pumpkin harvest was not that great because they evidently didn't get the right weather at the right time, is what I was told. But in Hardin County, they had an abundant pumpkin harvest. Last Friday when I was there, the second building was completely full of pumpkins and gourds. So they had a special pumpkin auction on Tuesday. I was at the Farm Science Review, so I didn't get to go to it. But I'll hear, whether or not they had enough order buyers and people to purchase all the pumpkins and how well the sale did. But that was the news that I got from my visit to the produce auction and talking to the growers this past week.
Yeah, so it sounds like you said that most of them were able to manage downy mildew on pumpkins and squash this season.
Yeah, and when I shared with them the list of fungicides that they could use, they were very familiar with them. They were using several of them. And of course, the good thing about it was they were general use fungicides. And they were things, since they are not licensed pesticide applicators in Hardin County, they were glad to hear that they could use those pesticides, and there was some good information there about how you can combine the different active ingredients and the timing of them and how often you should apply them in the different crops.
Hey, Mark, this is Jim. I just want to double check on something. Did you say that people lost pumpkins to downy mildew? Did I hear you say that correctly?
I was told that some of the new growers had issues with downy mildew and lost some of their pumpkin plants, is what I was told. But
okay,
they didn't know how to manage the disease, evidently.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, who really knows what happened? There's a lot of people between you and I and what actually happened, but downy mildew should not affect pumpkin fruit quality at all. It's just a disease on the foliage. And so my question was, if the foliage went down, did the fruit get sunburned? Because that should really be the only way you would lose fruit with downy mildew. And I don't remember it being reported widely through VegNet, or maybe Sally knows, just didn't report it. So I would just be a little, not suspect, but just, if you talk to people, just let them know that downy really isn't a disease on fruit. It's a foliage disease, and the loss is primarily through sun scald, through burning. So I just wanted to kind of put that in your ear.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Yeah, good point, Jim. All right, thank you, Mark, for the update. Let's move on now to Caden. Good to see you on the call today. Do you have an update from Darke County?
Morning, Chris. I don't really have anything myself. I was just, I'm here this morning to listen to what you all have to say and see what I can learn from you.
All right, no worries. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.
How about Thomas? What's going on in Lorraine County?
Yeah, not a whole lot, but I will share my screen here. I do have one berry grower in the county that had me come out, and he has some plastic culture berries that, most of his planting actually looks really nice, really free of diseases. But I did send these pictures to Melanie and Gary to take a look at, and they provided some suggestions. Gary had mentioned the potential for maybe a potassium deficiency. So one thing I'll follow up on with this particular grower is kind of seeing what their irrigation schedule is like, and as well as maybe see about pulling some plants to see what those roots look like. And then Melanie had also mentioned the potential for maybe really early kind of onset of powdery mildew. So there again, either bringing some plants here back to the office and checking under the microscope, or getting some plants to the diagnostic clinic. But just kind of showing the plants here that they kind of have this leaf curling, and that red blotching really kind of stayed to the underside of the leaves. But you can kind of see this marginal yellowing along the edge of the leaves, and again, just kind of the crinkling and curling, but just kind of odd. It was really isolated to just kind of one variety. There were maybe some samples in one other variety, but it really wasn't as severe as what we were seeing in this particular variety. But just figured I'd share that. Other than that, I really don't have a whole lot more to talk on for Lorraine. Things seem to be winding down pretty well. So, but
Thanks for sharing. Does anybody have any questions for Thomas or follow-ups on that strawberry diagnosis? All right, thanks, Thomas. How about Frank? What's going on in Wayne County?
Yeah, so I'll echo a lot of what's already been said, that the produce auctions, it was an interesting peak this year. It was kind of a late peak just with the late season we had. So we peaked probably mid-August, their first week of September, and pumpkins have really come on strong. They're already double stacking. I mean, they were double stacking pumpkin totes, really that first week. So, around here we really had good moisture, I would say. Right up until we had a storm, the northern part of our county, northwest, got about 7.5 inches of rain. And Tommy experienced some of that as well in Lorain County. And so that caused a lot of Phytophthora issues. And so we had some growers really struggling with their fall crops, that they pick them, they look good, and then they get them in the crates and bring them to the auction, and they melted down on the auction floor. So that was a bit of a challenge. Otherwise, though, we have really not seen any concerns with downy mildew in our pumpkin crops. It came on with the cucumbers and the cantaloupe, but that the strain that gets into pumpkins really never made itself present. So, otherwise, looking through some of those late season cole crops, I was kind of keeping an eye on the imported cabbage worm eggs. So, watching those eggs get laid, and then it really didn't take too long with some of the heat units we had for them to hatch. So we had a flush of really young imported cabbage worm larvae that were feeding on some of those crops, but we still had good time to control those. Some of those cabbage plants really were only maybe 8 to 10 leaves, so they were still young transplants, so they still had good time to get some chemical on those crops. So otherwise, late blight kind of made its entrance into some of our tomatoes, so that knocked out some of the season for growers. Just like Chris said, some of the bacterial issues this time of year real easy to get moved around the field, just with the amount of moisture from dew and cooler temperatures. It's just real easy for growers without knowing to spread that disease right up and down the row as they work in that crop. So that can be a little bit of a challenge, especially if they're trying to hang on to some of their crops a little later in the season. Fruit wise, kind of the same thing, just winding down. I know a few of the apple growers were complaining a little bit that they feel like they missed the mark on managing some of their like bitter pit or bitter rots, and some of them struggle a little bit with the sooty blotch fly speck issues. So they were hoping to maybe make some adjustments with their fungicide programs next year. They just felt like they kind of missed the mark this year. So otherwise, I think people were pretty pleased with this year. All things considered, it seemed like a frustrating year, but at the end, it all kind of came around. It's not a record year, like some of them have had the last couple of years, but certainly an acceptable year for most of the folks here in this area. So probably still do a few auction visits here into October and see what comes in. But certainly been a pretty good year for many of our growers, and I think that they'll take it and just look forward to next year.
Excellent. Well, that's pretty positive assessment, Frank, and thank you for all the information. Does anyone have any questions for Frank on any of those topics? All right. So I think that just leaves Gigi for the educators. Do you have an update for us?
Well, I think you guys answered my question in regards to the pumpkins, because we have a very disappointing community down here in Brown County area, which is where I live. They won't get to have their biggest pumpkin contest next week at the fair. but I think you guys answered that question earlier about what was going on with pumpkins. Otherwise, our demonstration gardens at the fairgrounds are winding down. We haven't had any major insect or disease problems throughout the season, but was very abundant back in August and then late July. Otherwise, that's all I got.
Okay, that's perfect. Thanks, Gigi. So I think in the interest of time, we'll just move on to our specialists who are on the meeting today. Let's see. How about Gary? Do you have an update for us?
Well, I don't have much of an update, and maybe I'll think of something. The conversations that I had, from people who walk by, maybe I'll write something. So right now, I'm just all distracted by trying to come up with pictures for Logan. So that's all I got.
All right, thanks, Gary. Yeah, definitely a lot of good conversations at the Farm Science Review this year. So lots to think about there. Logan, do you have an update for us?
So the past week and a half or so, I've been obviously most of it's Farm Science Review, but also working with the pawpaw growers last weekend. Just a comment, I don't know if this is of much interest beyond that group, but maybe. So generally the pawpaw crop across the strait was considered pretty low this year. They were going for really high premiums at Pawpaw Festival last week, and they were selling for $30 a pound, and there was a line as far as you could see, people grabbing them. The crop seems to be delayed in a lot of areas they made note of, and we think it might have to do with the wildfire smoke this summer. At least that's one speculation. I think it makes some sense. I think I've heard that comment in several other crops as well. They are much later than what we were seeing in the past. So just something to comment on there. Kind of a little really specialty crop there as far as a little niche market. But beyond that, I've talked to a lot of our hops growers. They're wrapping or have wrapped up harvest. Some of the southern ones that use lights and stuff just now are finishing up their harvest. Some of the other ones have already finished up in the past. So things are starting to kind of wind down in those areas.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate the info from the hops and pawpaw perspective. We don't get that a whole lot. Sorry, go ahead, Melanie.
I was just going to ask Logan, were they seeing any Phylostytica or pawpaw diseases this year?
So we saw a little bit of that in some of the wild orchard, the Phylostytica. Oh, and the another, I don't know if you're aware of this, part in our orchard here on camp at South Center, sorry. Parker was finding pawpaw canker in a few of the trees earlier this year. We had some trees getting blister the bark and fall off, and John he contacted John Strang down in Kentucky, and that's who actually identified it a little before I came on board. But I agree that's what it certainly looks like. So we've been seeing that a little bit here, but I haven't heard much other complaint of pawpaw disease though.
It would be great if I could get some of that sample and have it here. We've had in the past blue stain, which is Pythium, in some of the other plantations, but I'm having trouble with Koch's postulates getting pawpaw trees. So that's one of my problems. But definitely, if you have disease issues, please make sure that you think of me when you're trying to diagnose them and find out what.
Yeah, that's the only one I know of is the canker, and I'll find out from Tom if there's still some material, or I'll go look. That was one that I guess showed up early this summer, is before I came on board, and he figured out that's what was going on with it. We can get you some of that if you're interested. As far as blue stain, I heard people talk about, but I'd never heard anyone like confirmation. They said they had an issue with it, just they were concerned that it exists out there and so on. That was basically it.
Yeah, any pictures you have too for the pawpaw would be great. And we can talk later, but I've been trying to compile it to have a fact sheet for Ohio on some of the common things they might see in pawpaw.
Okay, yeah, I think Tom took some pictures. I'll find out for sure, and if he did, I'll get you those. And if I run into further, pawpaw ailments, I'll send you photos and material if you want. That's fine.
Logan, I just texted you a couple pictures. You were in the by accident.
That's usually how it ends up. That's fine.
I need to do a much better job next year to take these better close-ups. Okay, here we are. Okay.
Great, thank you
Chris,
for the
go
update,
ahead.
Logan. And yeah, Frank, I saw Frank put something in the chat. Beware of spotted cucumber beetles this time of year on cucurbits. And I know that's something that Ashley referenced in our last meeting, is the shift from striped to spotted cucumber beetles this time of year. So yeah, good tip there. All right, does anybody have any questions for Logan? All right, great. So I think let's move on to Jim. You're out in the field today. Do you have an update for us?
Yes, pumpkins are, number one right now, which is awesome. It's a great crop, but yeah, we're pretty much seeing everything sort of stop in terms of sprays. Mostly, I think people had good seasons, which is great. So I think that's sort of that's good all the way around. I don't have much other than to say our corn earworm trapping is going to end at the end of next week. The numbers have really come down. So I think, like you said earlier, Chris, most people are not growing sweet corn that much right now. So it's not a huge, huge issue. And I'm quite confident that the laser scarecrow does not work. As I was adjusting it, there was a couple of birds that landed about 15 feet away from me. The laser went right over their heads and they didn't even move. So I don't think it's very viable for these finches here in the sunflower. So that's, I think, pretty much all I have.
Yeah, that's never a good sign. Thank you, Jim, for the update there. And I think that just leaves Melanie. Do you have an update for us?
I'll just share my screen. So just following up with what Frank said about the fruit rots. This is the time where you'll start to see them. And generally, when we're diagnosing if it's black rot or white rot or bitter rot, we can cut open the fruit and get an idea. But these are empire apples, and the symptoms on the outside and the signs, you can see the fungal fruiting bodies here, and then in the close-up made me think it was bitter rot. But then when we cut them open, or the grower cut them open, we have these V-shaped lesions, but they're soft and they're smelly, which suggests that it's white rot. So this was an odd symptom. They have it severe. You can see the fruit here, severe in their empire, and that's the only variety that's impacted. We're seeing in Golden Delicious a fair amount of Marsanina spot on the fruit and also on the leaves. And it sounds like Frank was seeing some bitter rot. So, this has a lot to do with the spray program and making sure that some of the harder chemistries are getting put on the last couple sprays. But also we're finding, and this has been a trend the last few years, that you can't just stop your spray program anymore as early as we have in the past, because we're having warmer weather later and also more rain. So it's going to be important that, the conventional spray program gets put on, until, usually a week to 10 days before harvest is when you want to put your last application on. And making sure that you have a harder chemistry in there for these fruit rots. I think that's it. We had an odd sample come in on pear with spot, and it's not alternaria and it's not scab. So we're trying to figure out what's going on. It was just one variety, but almost all the fruits covered in this spot, which I'm not going to show a picture yet because I want to make sure I can figure out what's going on before before I report it. But I think the take-home message is, you know, for apple producers who are using conventional programs is, you know, they need to tighten their cover sprays up, they need to extend their cover sprays, and they have to make sure that they have a harder chemistry, not just Captan, on for their last couple sprays to protect from these fruit rots. And we've been recommending that since about 2018 when Ohio lost a huge portion of their Honeycrisp to bitter rot. We've been, you know, advocating for these tighter, longer spray programs to preserve the fruit. I think that's pretty much all I have. Thomas showed the picture of strawberry, and I gave him some ideas on how he can confirm it in the lab, but it looks a lot like powdery mildew to me. And so I'll be curious to see if he actually sees spores. The variety that he showed, I tried to look up some information on it and, you know, could only find very general information. It's susceptible to verticillium and susceptible to leaf diseases. That's basically all I could find on there. Is Thomas still on here?
I am. Yep.
Remind me of the variety. Was
Is Dar Select?
Dar Select, yeah, which I hadn't really heard of. And then just something else to keep in mind, these were on black plastic, and he's trying to grow them as annuals, which is fine in Ohio the first year, but a lot of growers try to extend it a second year. And what happens is in that planting, we see a buildup of root rots and crown rots. And so usually the second year isn't very successful. So growers should keep that in mind, that they really are, these plants are bred as annuals and they should be grown as such. Otherwise, they get into things like Colototricum crown rot and black root rot really start to take them out in the second year. And that's it.
Melanie, when you talk about cover sprays, what is the difference between a cover spray and an early season spray?
So good question. The early season sprays start usually at, you know, bud break all the way to petal drop, and you're targeting primary apple scab mostly in that period, trying to protect the foliage and the new fruitlets from scab. Cover sprays generally start about a week after petal drop. And in the past, it's been every, you know, 10 to 14 days. But now we, you know, with the weather and the increased incidence in fruit rots, we recommend 7 to 10 days, which means a lot of sprays, unfortunately. And then those usually put, you know, 4 to 5 cover sprays on, and then a grower would stop. But again, we're saying that they need to extend that for better protection, and then add something like an estrobilurin or a DMI into their final spray.
Is there anything different about the method of application or what you target with a cover spray versus a early season spray?
Yeah, the cover sprays are usually, if you had any primary scab settle in, then you're protecting against secondary scab, which is basically the spores spread from the leaves onto the fruit. But generally, the main target are your sooty blotch, fly speck, and your fruit rots with those cover sprays. We also saw, you had mentioned or I think it was you, but had mentioned seeing quite a bit of sooty blotch and fly speck. We also saw a lot of that. There is a model that you can use, a predictive model that can be used to try and improve your timings of your applications for sooty blotch and fly speck. So it might be worth growers considering using that. And that's based on the number of leaf wetness hours. And that's available on NUA, or you can get information, you know, just on my website, Fruit Pathology, or anywhere on the internet on on how to calculate those hours, but you really need to have a weather station, you know, in your orchard for accurate sooty blotch and fly speck monitoring and forecasting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think that's it for me.
Great, excellent update as always, Melanie. Some really good practical recommendations there, and we'll try and link to that predictive model in our report this week. So some good discussion too. So I think that's everybody. I'd like to thank the educators and specialists who joined the call today for taking the time to share your updates. And I would encourage any growers who are watching or listening to this to please reach out if you have any questions about fruit and vegetable production. We're here to help.